So welcome back to the studio. This is going to be a rather fascinating program today with Jane Curtis, and we're talking about a couple of women that you may have never heard of who were involved in the aerospace program. Jane, welcome.
Hi. These two ladies were both actually, neither one of them was actually an astronaut, but both of them played extremely important roles in this field, and particularly in this field as it pertains to African Americans and to any blacks, as it turns out. But the first one, time-wise, is Bessie Coleman. And Bessie Coleman was born in Texas, Atlanta, Texas.
Strange
Texas. Place. One
Okay.
of 13 children. Cabin with dirt floor, you know, the usual, the really beginning at the bottom of the heap. Her father was more than half American Indian, Choctaw or Cherokee, I never could determine which. So that makes her a sort of double symbol and double inspiration for people. She was went to a one-room school, 4-mile walk and all that. Early on showed a aptitude for math, which she retained. But she went through the school a couple of years after her birthday, had moved to Waxahachie, which was not much more of a big city. But her father, well, the whole family, in fact, got into picking cotton in the season, as I guess most people did in those days. But she went through this grammar school at any rate, and actually graduated, and then went on to a mission school and completed 4 years of high school there, which was pretty remarkable. And she only got one term of college, which was another, you know, blacks-only college, before the money ran out. But eventually, she was born in 1892, which put her right in the swim of the developing aviation world.
Right.
And we have no evidence as to what she thought about that. But when the war began, she had moved to Chicago in 1915, and she had a couple of brothers living there, and she was staying with them. And she was taken under the wing of a couple of black entrepreneurs. The editor of the local paper, the local black paper, whose name was Abbott, Robert Abbott, and the owner of a bank with the superb name of Binga. His first name was Jesse Binga. And they were both upstanding businessmen. I think, in fact, we see a picture of them in a minute in our video. But they eventually, she got interested in aviation, and she was working at as a manicurist in the White Sox barber shop. So she was contacting all of these ball players, and some of the ball players were people coming back from the war. So she got interested in it from the stories, and she tried to get some instruction, and nobody would take A, a woman, B, a black, either one, and she was both. So these two kindly entrepreneurs financed a trip for her. She went to France, where they would train women. And it was after the war, she got her international pilot's license, the first woman of any kind to get one in the world. And she kept working, of course, from then on, but she became a daredevil pilot. Her strong point was not the calculation that we're going to see with some of the others, but was, I mean, obviously she knew enough mathematics and physics to be very good at aerobatics, which is doing all of these daredevil things, and evolving new tricks and all that. She wanted to go into exhibition flying, but again, nobody would give her the advanced training she needed, so she went back to France, and she actually trained with some the aviators there, some aces from the war period. And I think that with this background, I would like for us to look at a video, a fairly long video, documentary on her. And I think it's high time that something like this came out. I don't know all the background of this one, but I was surprised and very pleased to find this. So as you look at it, remember now that she has had this very humble beginning. She's born in 1892, so during the war years, you see that makes her an adult and all that, young adult. But when we come to the end of the video, then we're going to say a couple more things there. Two important things were left out. And we're going to talk a little bit about the other lady whose Katherine Johnson, who was the brains behind things like John Glenn's trajectory to the moon and so on, just instinctive mathematics. So please, if we could have the video now on Bessie Coleman.
Famous inventors such as Wilbur and Orville Wright from Dayton, Ohio, Glenn Curtiss from Hammondsport, New York, Brazilian-born Alberto Santos Dumont, and Louis Blériot from France. Although they differed in their origins, temperaments, and design strategies, all of them were male and all of them were white. In 1892, however, a tiny baby was born in northeastern Texas who eventually would change the face of aviation, both figuratively and literally. On January 26th of that year, Elizabeth Bessie Coleman was born in Atlanta, Texas. Her parents, George and Susan Coleman, were African-American sharecroppers who could neither read nor write. In 1894, the Coleman family moved to Waxahachie, Texas, a town about 30 miles south of Dallas. At age 6, Bessie started attending school in a one-room shack 4 miles from her home. In 1901, tired of the racism that faced black people in Texas, George Coleman, being part Choctaw, decided to move to Oklahoma, then called Indian Territory. Susan Coleman, however, insisted on staying in Texas with her daughters. Susan began working for a white family. When cotton harvest came around, mother and daughters augmented the family's meager income by picking cotton. In 1910, Bessie enrolled in the Agricultural and Normal University, a blacks-only school in Langston, Oklahoma. Poverty forced her to leave after just 1 year, so she returned home and earned money by washing clothes. When Bessie turned 23, she moved to Chicago to live with 2 older brothers, Walter and John. Walter worked regularly as a Pullman porter, but John was often unemployed. While still living down in Texas, Coleman had announced to her mother that she wanted, quote, to amount to something, unquote. Now, up in Chicago, she sought a better life than that of just a maid, cook, or laundress. She attended the Burnham School of Beauty Culture and then found a job as a manicurist in a men's barber shop on Chicago's South Side. In 1917, when the United States entered World War I, Coleman's brothers went to Europe as part of Illinois' all-black 8th Army National Guard. After the war ended, the brothers returned home, and one brother started teasing Bessie about her limited circumstances, saying that French women had much better career prospects. Some French women, he added, even took to the skies as pilots. Coleman took her brother's remark as a provocation to learn to fly, but she quickly discovered that no American aviation school would train women or minorities. Undeterred by the limits placed on her sex and race, she developed a plan to make it to France and learn to fly. She took French lessons, found a better-paying job, and enlisted the aid of African Americans to bring her plan to fruition. One person who helped Coleman financially was Robert Abbott, founder and owner of the Chicago Defender, one of the city's leading black newspapers. She also sought help from Jesse Binga, an ambitious real estate owner and founder of a bank that bore his name. In 1920, claiming to be 4 years younger than her actual age of 28, Coleman applied for an American passport. On November 20th of that year, she boarded the SS Imperator in New York Harbor and steamed for Europe. In northern France, Coleman found training at the Caudron Brothers Aviation School. Founded by the French airplane builders René Caudron and his brother Gaston, the aviation school was at the time the most famous one in France. Coleman's training plane was the Newport Type 82, a common trainer of the era. During her 7-month course, she learned how to make banking turns, how to recover from tailspins, and how to loop the loop. With a pilot's license dated June 15, 1921, Bessie Coleman became the first black person in the world, man or woman, to earn an international pilot's license. After finishing her course in northern France, she went to Paris for additional training. In September, she steamed for home on the SS Manchuria. When the ship arrived in New York, newspaper men, both white and black, met the ship in order to meet America's first black woman aviator. While in New York, Coleman was wined and dined by the African American community. She attended performances of a play called Shuffle Along, the first successful musical in America starring black actors. With lyrics written by pianist U.B. Blake and his friend Noble Sissel, the musical included performers such as Florence Mills and the incomparable Ethel Waters. When Coleman returned to Chicago, the Defender printed a photograph of her mother holding a silver cup that the Flyer had received in New York from Shuffle Along cast members. In the 1910s and 20s, American pilots had few ways to make a living. Most commonly, they earned income by holding air shows, performing feats like parachuting, challenging race cars to high-speed dashes, or looping the loop. To succeed on the air show circuit, Coleman quickly realized that she needed more flight training, but American flying schools continued to refuse her admittance. In February of 1922, therefore, Coleman returned to New York City to prepare for a second trip to France. Once again, New York's African American community entertained the Flyer. She met again with cast members of the Shuffle Along musical and addressed the 2,500-member Metropolitan Baptist Church, which gave her a standing ovation. On February 22nd, back she steamed to France, this time on the SS Paris. After 2 months of flight training in France, Coleman went to Holland, where she met the Dutch airplane designer Anthony Fokker. In late May, she went to Germany, soon borrowed a plane, and flew it over the Kaiser's Palace in Berlin. She stayed 10 weeks in that country, meeting many flyers. Among them was Robert Talon, a German aviation pioneer, one of the Wright brothers' European employees, and designer of the Albatros D-3 fighter plane of World War I. In early August, Coleman steamed for home on the SS Noordam. Newsmen once again met her ship when it docked in New York Harbor. Realizing that dramatic stories would entice air shows to hire her as an aerial performer, she claimed that she had learned to fly after serving with the Red Cross in Europe during World War I. She also claimed to have met German royalty and politicians, and that she had flown a large German seaplane. Coleman's chance to fly before the American public first came at Curtiss Field in Garden City, Long Island, in early September of 1922. New York's all-black 15th Infantry paraded on the field, and the Flyer herself wore a military-style outfit while flying a Curtiss JN-4. Upon landing, the Flyer received a bouquet of flowers from none other than Trinidad's famed aviation pioneer and a self-promoter in his own right, Hubert Fauntleroy Julian. The September 4th issue of one of New York's papers reported that at least 1,000 spectators, mostly African American, had attended the event. In mid-October, at Checkerboard Field in Chicago, Coleman made her first flights in front of her adopted city. The airport's owner, a white flyer named David Benke, who supported her flying efforts, provided the plane for her performance. In January of 1923, Coleman boarded a train for the West Coast to meet with officers of the Coast Tire and Rubber Company in California in hopes of doing aerial advertising for the firm. After visiting the company's manufacturing plant in Oakland, she headed south to Rockwell Air Intermediate Depot in San Diego, where she acquired a Curtiss JN-4. In early February, Coleman took off from Santa Monica to fly 25 miles to a fairground celebration in Los Angeles. At 300 feet, her engine stalled, and the plane then crashed. Coleman was knocked unconscious and suffered a broken leg, 3 broken ribs, several cuts, and other injuries. Rescuers took her to St. Catherine Hospital in downtown Santa Monica, where it took her 3 months to recuperate. It took over 2 more years for Coleman to return to flying. Now performing in Houston, Texas in 1925, she did motor stalls, dives, barrel rolls, figure eights, and loop-the-loops. Her performance had particular social and cultural importance because it took place on June 19th, or Juneteenth, the date on which Texas slaves first learned of their emancipation through an order read by Union General Gordon Granger. In mid-July, Coleman flew at a church event in Richmond, Texas, and then again in Houston for black employees of the Southern Pacific Railway. In early August, she flew in San Antonio, and in early September, she flew in Wharton, Texas, and performed a parachute jump. Coleman finally made her way to Waxahachie, her childhood town. As was common then, white spectators and black spectators sat in different sections. However, in Waxahachie and other venues over the years, the flyer demanded that both races enter through the same gate, or else she would not fly. In January of 1926, Coleman went south again, giving aviation lectures first in Georgia and then in Florida. With a steadier income, she bought another plane, a used Curtiss JN-4, stored at Love Field in Dallas, to replace the one destroyed in her Santa Monica crash. Coleman now was in Jacksonville, Florida, so she hired a white pilot named William D. Wills to fly the plane to her. She was scheduled to perform again on May 1st at Paxson Field in Jacksonville for members of the city's Negro Welfare League. On April 30th, Wills flew over the field at 3,000 feet with Coleman as a passenger, so she could determine the best landing spot for her next day's parachute jump. The plane suddenly sped up, dropped into a tailspin, and then turned over at 500 feet. With her seatbelt unbuckled to better see her landing spot, Coleman fell out of the plane and plunged to her death. Wills could not regain control of the plane, hit a tree, and crashed to his death about 300 yards from where Coleman's body lay. Although joined in their fates, Wills and Coleman were segregated after their deaths, as Coleman's body went to a blacks-only funeral home. The black-owned Chicago Defender spread news of Coleman's death across the entire front page of its paper. A white-owned Jacksonville paper posted a small news article in the upper left corner of its front page, giving Wills pride of place in the report. The African-American community gave Coleman a royal send-off worthy of her aviation nickname, Queen Bess. Her body first lay in state at Jacksonville's Bethel Baptist Institutional Church. From there, her body went on to Orlando, Florida, where she was honored at Mount Zion Missionary Baptist Church. And in Chicago, on Friday, May 7, 1926, 10,000 mourners paid their respects at Pilgrim Baptist Church. America's first black woman flyer lies buried in Lincoln Cemetery in Blue Island, Illinois. At the time of her death, Elizabeth Bessie Coleman was only 34 years old.
That was rather fascinating.
Yes, I think it's a nice life study, and
Yes.
it certainly brings out why she was an inspiration, which is one of the most important things about her role.
Right.
There was a theory that the final crash was sabotage by rivals
Oh, really?
in the air show circuit.
Huh.
Nobody can prove that either way, and they did. A big deal was not made of it, but unfortunately, still the publicity about that had him first.
Oh, well, of course, yeah.
The one she had hired as a mechanic and so on.
Yeah.
But things were getting better on that, and she had forced a lot of good entering the arena,
same
so to
gate,
speak,
you're right.
of forcing them to let everybody use the same gate. But the one important thing, or thing I found quite important, the air show they mentioned where the infantry unit paraded. That whole thing was in honor, and she did a lot of this pro bono, so to speak. She wasn't paid for it, other than some of them, of course, she got gate receipts, saved her money. But at that one, it was in honor of this black regiment. And she did another one. Well, she didn't do it, but she was instrumental in preparing for it. One of the people she inspired was another black flyer named Willa, what was Willa's last name? Brown, I think. And whereas Bessie Coleman always had the ideal of founding a school for black students to learn aviation, any kind of black student, any kind of not white students could. And she was trying to make more money to do that. When this happened, of course, she would have tried to open it. She'd even opened a beauty shop somewhere in Florida, trying to get more money together. But this Willa Brown succeeded in doing it. And she founded a school called the Coffee School of Aviatics, was the other word. And in that school, a lot of the members of the 99th Pursuit Squadron, World War II, which to you and me was the Tuskegee Airmen, got their initial training. Oh, okay. So she was very, very important as a beacon. I think also now, the other person I wanted to mention today, of course, not saying as much about her because there's not as much action. Bessie Coleman was the action person. Yes. And also had enough talent mathematically and so on to do it. But the other lady, this was a lady named Catherine Coleman, no connection, Catherine Coleman Gable Johnson. And she came from a little more affluent black background. She had a pretty good education. But she was obviously a mathematical genius from a very, very low age. But she only black institution could she go to school. Right. And she finally, she and several other black mathematicians, two others in particular, women, were hired by NASA in the 1950s. And she could apparently just calculate a trajectory in space the way you and I would list or make our grocery bill or something like that. But she did. She was so very good at it that when John Glenn went up on his moon trip, he insisted that she counter-check the computer's figures on the trajectory, which she did. But she also, on the side, figured the fallback in case anything happened with that and they had to have another way of trying to get back to Earth. She calculated that in her head, which seems to me a truly remarkable thing. Right. But she has a list of honors, really literally as long as your leg. They just go page after page when you look this up in the computer. And the honors were for small things and big things alike, but some of the small things that she figured out. She was not given due credit for a lot of this until things like this John Glenn request began to come out. And the other women who were there, of course, they all could master the computer with no difficulty, but she could also do it. You know, the
human computer herself.
The human computer. In fact, she was called that at one stage. But of course, Bessie Coleman, she and Bessie Coleman never knew each other. But I think that to some extent they stand at the beginning and the end. I believe Catherine Johnson is the most well-known of this group of mathematicians. She was also a physicist and trained in both. And I think, as a matter of fact, she broke the barrier in a couple of educational institutions, but she certainly broke it as far as getting, and these were not just kind of vague things that she got all these recognitions for, but they were specific, pinned down. So nobody could say, oh, well, they're just 2 or 3 and they're making it up. No, it was not the case with her. But calculating trajectories is, as you can well imagine, is a difficult thing. And she seems to have just seen a lot of this without having to figure it out. She'd confirm it, figuring it out. But she, I don't know if, let's say 1966, she was, I think, sort of at her prime, still a youngish woman. So she's lived a long, long life, and she did a lot of speaking. Bessie Coleman, too, did a lot of speaking in connection with these tours she made for exhibitions. And there's one picture, there's a picture there, I believe I had it last in my list of pictures, but it shows somebody, when there were plays were written, there was allegedly a movie, which I couldn't find any more about, on Bessie Coleman, The Colorful Life. But it shows a rather stockier lady than, here it was. All this, I had trouble, I could bring this up on my computer bigger, but it was some funny connected thing, and you can't see it too well. But she's just holding a microphone, and I don't know if they had that kind of microphone already in the 1920s, but this is clearly part of one of the later films. But she would go around to any place where there were black employees or workers or whatever that she could inspire, students particularly. And you see this is in some kind of a factory. And all these men, I'm sorry that that picture is not better, but I tried hard to bring it up better. But they're all smiling and happy, and she looks genial. Apparently she was very good at that. She'd make an instant contact when she talked to people. She'd connect somehow in ways that everybody doesn't do. And of course she had this stunning background behind her. Anybody who'd ever seen her fly. Catherine Stinson, another early, she was the only real daredevil pilot before Bessie Coleman that got a lot of fame. She was white. But she invented what was the name of that thing? It was a double loop flip or some weird thing like that. But you had to know your body. I mean, she must have had a firm head. She never got seasick in her life. But it must have been fantastic what she did. But at any rate, she spread it around, and just as Katherine Johnson was to do later, and these other women, of course, they were in demand as speakers, especially at technical colleges.
Right.
And once they got over this hump at NASA, they had a separate, whole separate setup for them. They were in one section, and the white ones were in another. They didn't interact in the same space, and that, of course, was overcome. So you have to admire their strength to keep on, in face of all this. No, you can't
determined
be
to do
here.
what they knew they could do.
Yeah, and fortunately, a large number of men also recognized genius when they saw it, and the two got ahead. But I think they're a fine example to present in this month, this Black History Month.
Right.
Some history that still isn't too well known.
No.
And of course, there are the black astronauts have come along.
Right.
And in fact, even the black participation in the wars 1 and 2 was not brought out very much, soft-pedaled. But it's coming around now. So
Yeah. Some of these facts are coming out now as people look at the true history. Yeah.
And they inspire the upcoming ones. That's the thing I think is so keenly important in what they did.
That's right.
Yeah.
Yeah. Fascinating show. Thank you so much, Jane.
You're welcome. A pleasure.
Okay, let's look and see what our special programming is.